It does also include some attempt at cross-comparison based on assessed themes related to performances of health. I'm interested in deepening my thinking on the subject and working out ways in which to use selected materials from the book and the large amount of material that was omitted from the book to develop a wider set of thematic and theoretical discussions. Like all geographers, I wear different hats to suit the occasion, so today, Matthew, I will be playing the part of a historical health geographer, though I do have some plausible previous in the subject. In addition, the paper is quite perspective and a form of thinking aloud, so any critical feedback is more than welcome. Not wishing to overegg the pudding, especially as I'm quite a poor cook in this regard, I don't wish to list the many different theoretical frameworks and ideas within which the study of Irish therapeutic landscapes could be placed. I'm interested in a number of theoretical positions around active network theory, non-representational theory, and the performance of term, which are used, if somewhat unconvincingly, in my earlier work. I'm also drawn to associate ideas of the assemblage and relational geographies, but today I've been finding it really difficult to interpret and utilise what are often extremely conceptual theoretical ideas, very likely sketched out in other geographies, and focused on what seems at times very flat and amaterial dimensions of the political economy, of the social. Jones's recent paper on phase space challenges and explores some of these positions, but I'm still really struggling to translate all of these ideas into medical health geography and therapeutic landscapes research. It feels like it's sort of there at the tip of my typing finger, but maybe I'm already inadvertently working on assemblages of social and cultural practice, but a convincing spark is still needed. Anyway, at heart is a concern with merging and assembling a set of ideas around water, health and place, which appear to me to be deeply embedded within human geography and have potential for sharper analysis than I've managed to date. Drawing on material from the book, I'm interested in looking at local, global and a wider relational dimension of three types of place which are to be found in both Ireland and beyond. The time periods concerned are varied. Spas in Ireland have histories that date from the 1680s to the present day, which are at their peak in the 18th and 19th century. Turkish baths, part of a mid-19th century craze which rather oddly has part of its origin in Ireland, lasted well into the early decades of the 20th century. Finally, the seaside is generally thought to have been a sort of direct descendant and triumphant competitor of the inland spa, but their historical geographies overlap in much more complex ways. All three are still evident and encounterable in different and somewhat surprisingly resilient forms in 2012. The material I'm using is from 18th and 19th century work was drawn from a range of archival sources, photographs, travellers' accounts, brochures, booklets, posters, postcards, and even novels and songs. In the case of the Lucan Spa Hotel illustrated here, a range of travellers' accounts, photographs, maps, and 18th century medical reports tell us something about its multiple identities in time. Lenbrook, Turkish bath in Munster, County Cork, is extensively documented in, well actually maybe not extensively, it's documented in pamphlets, photos, and medical reports, and I've also drawn from Malcolm Schifrin's definitive website, www.victorianturkishbath.org, which is an amazing resource. Finally, sites like the Ladies' Bathing Place in Portrush provide us with evidence, both concrete and representational, to support plausible discussions on a range of social practices broadly associated with health and healing. It's probably hard to see this, but the image on this page shows a modern house in the small octagon-shaped green of Johnstown, County Kilkenny. Yet the town's invisible older history as the Ballyspellin Spa is quite literally staring us in the face. This building, named the Spa House, acted as the assembly rooms of the town after it was built, the town that is, not the house, by John Healy in 1770. But the Ballyspellin Spa had been functional since at least 1700. Other early spa towns included Wexford, Mallow, Castleconnell and Swan and Bar, while Ballynahinch listed Barn over later 19th century developments. The spa, of course, is a classic trope in therapeutic landscapes research, built environments developed around water sources and mostly developed across a entrepreneurial cycle based on waves of discovery, testing, authentication, healing reputation, accommodation, fashionability. Yet the Irish spa never quite detaches itself in colonial terms from the metropole, and I'll explore some of those relational geographies as well. The Turkish bath in Ireland, at least, has a fascinating local global history. After the development of an intense European-wide interest in hydrotherapy in the 1830s and 1840s, A prominent Irish exponent, Dr. Richard Barter of Blarney, began to experiment with the design of a new type of Turkish bath. In designing a form where the steam was removed through the side walls, his new invention became a proto-franchise and spread to all corners of the globe. And again, I'll come back to its relational history, but there's a really good paper by Ronan in Victorian Studies in 2004 that documents the Turkish bath. While narratives in the UK suggest that the development of the seaside resort superseded the spa, in truth the health histories of both sides parallel and complement each other. Indeed, many coastal resorts were seen as spas, while the history of sea bathing and seawater drinking dates in Ireland from the very end of the 17th century and are well embedded by the beginning of the 18th. John Moulton describes a set of seaside resort templates, most copied from the English model, to be found all along the coastline of primarily kind of northern Europe, from Asturias around to Estonia, with a set of kind of English-type templates. He also finds evidence of older rural practices, as did I, and some of these are certainly to be found in Ireland. While in the mid-19th century railway network did open up access to resorts, there were older relational networks, especially through coastal steamers, that supported resort development. So what I want to do in the remaining slides is pick out 3 relational themes and discuss these against these 3 types of therapeutic landscapes. It may appear over-empirical, but I want to use the material base to explore how much one might begin to understand and theorize 3 sets of relational geographies. The first is explicitly spatial, concerned with the networks and flows of people and objects across a set of scales. A second concern is with uncovering the shifting geographies of class across space and time, given the 18th, 19th century context of the sites. Finally, and I guess overlapping with the other 2, is a concern with power relations, but here expressed specifically around the place of medicine in the body and then the practice of medicine. And I just, if Chris will tell me to stop at that point, I'll try and do a final summary. So in thinking about the kinds of spatial relations that emerge at the spas, I want to utilise the notion of the globalising therapeutic landscape introduced by Alison Williams and developed by younger scholars like Anne-Cécile Hoyes and Jen Lee. The first spas in Ireland were inspired by spa forms taken from the continent, usually encountered during grand tours and then brought back home as they filter down the colonial pipeline. Of course, many of these are quite exotic forms, originally neoclassical and later neo-oriental, especially in the case of the Turkish bath. It must have appeared incongruous to see the Limerick Turkish bath, operational from 1887 to 1927, set alongside a church building in urban Ireland, though both perhaps are Mediterranean reproductions of the sort. Indeed, both spas and seaside resorts were also sites of architectural experimentation which involved transformations of the natural as well as the local built environments. The story of how Barter develops his hot air bath takes us on a journey from Rome, where his nephew studies the Roman thermae, to the Crimean War, where Barter's acquaintance Urquhart studies hammams, back to Blarney, where Barter, known locally as the Med Doctor, perfected his model. In a final twist, the hydro at St Anne's, where the first bath was built, was visited by developers from Baden-Baden, who brought it back to Germany as the Roman Irish bath. And this image is from an entrance to, very hard to see, but the entrance to a modern survival, the Irish Römisches Bad at the Kaiser Friedrich Therme in Wiesbaden. So again, there is actually, if you go to Span, Germany, wondering where Ireland fits, this is where it comes from. Narratives of entrepreneurial travel for the developers and investors in all 3 settings tell us something of the strong economic and business motives that underpin these importations of the exotic as a site of wonder. A commercial production of space develops whereby the invocation and imitation of other places was central. God knows how many times Irish seaside resorts from Portrush to Kilkee to Tramore were described as the Brighton of the northwest and south respectively. Bray was quite literally designed to be a spatial facsimile of Brighton, right down to a planned pier and bylaws. And there was a beautiful description of a pier in the thing I was at yesterday as a disappointed bridge. Very nice. Similarly, spa waters were often relationally described against British and continental models, except of course in this case they were the bath of the west, the north, the east, etc. Typical narratives, however, pointed out that the waters at Mallow, for example, were usually noted as being superior to those of Harrogate or Leamington. So there was always this kind of additional process of spatial one-upmanship being used to sell the power of the spa water. In a sense, given Ireland's wider colonial position, the shadow of relations with the metropole hung over the developers, but also the clienteles. Spa visitors, the majority of whom were drawn from the Anglo-Irish world, craved respectability and approval of their performances and the spaces in which those performances took place. But much like a distant parent, approval is withheld with subsequent psychological effects. So the ambiguous identity of the spa client, neither British enough for Britain or Irish enough for the Irish, is expressed often by going to British and continental spas. James Kelly from Drumcondra recounts how large numbers of Irish visitors are recorded at Bath and Cheltenham, where their presence is seen as diminishing the reputation of the place, a reflection of how the Anglo-Irish in turn saw the local Irish in their local spas. Withering comments are also to be found too in early therapeutic guides and traveller accounts as to the quality of the Irish spa. Like the withholding of a Michelin star, the core commodified products, the waters and their surrounding assemblages of therapeutic objects and subjects are always judged inferior to those of the metropole. There's a strong connection then between the spatial relations of the place and the people in it. In considering a second set of class relations, there are a range of shifting positionalities across the period in question, reflecting society as a whole, I guess. In the 18th century, the Anglo-Irish are fully in charge at the spa and at the seaside resort. And while the image of the spa as a site of gentility and upper-class social networking holds sway in many of our imaginative reproductions and representations, the truth was often very different. At spas like Mallow and Castleconnell, bands of wild young men drink, hunt, dance, chase girls and other people's wives, and are commemorated in poems like The Rakes of Mallow. Swift writes scathingly of the ambivalent reputations and practices carried out in Wexford and Ballyspellin, and the presence of pocky drabs who have successfully come to cure their scabs. While in the 18th century the liminal is encountered among the Anglo-Irish, the revolting native appears more visibly from the middle of the 19th century on. They were there before, just never rendered visible. Travellers recount the ways in which young locals illegally use the bathing boxes when the sun goes down in Kilkee, while a fascinating vignette from the same place notes that the local, predominantly Irish-speaking of natives in the mid-19th century refer to their summer visitors as ruacook, literally meaning red shits. This refers to an evidence base drawn from the Irish diets of the Anglo-Irish and its unfortunate exposure to the locals who have to clean up after them. More broadly, and especially in a more regulated and circumspect Victorian world, class identities shape spatial behaviours. Performances of class are embedded within the performance of health and are counted in a range of forms. Clothes, behaviours, social acts, specific health performances like taking the water, assembly, perambulation and consultation with spa doctors all exemplify what might be seen as inside or outsider roles within and outside the specific spa, seaside or bath settings. A sort of class-spread knowledge allows the insider to know what to do. The Arabist has perhaps to look around for clues. In contrast, Ronan and others note the impact in spaces like the Turkish bath or one of the male-only coastal bathing spots of the removal of clothing and in the difficulty of placing the naked body in class terms. Yet by the latter half of the 19th century, there are shifting relational placings of the ascendancy in what you might call nouveau Roman classes in all three settings. The early spas declined with competition from British and European competitors, and what's left behind is seen perhaps as a little more down market. Liston-Barn is a classic example. It's both too far away and not classy enough for the visitor from the metropole, and in time passes over to more local clientele, the emergent Catholic middle class, wealthy farmers, and increasingly the priest. De Beauvais quotes entertainingly of the presence of large numbers of priests in Liston-Barn from late 1891, where she notes their political and social importance, though rather scathingly notes also that they don't seem to drink as much as they used to. These shifts are more obvious in some places than others. The opening up of Bray after the arrival of the railway leads to a mass exodus of the upper classes. They head down the coast instead to set up a new resort in Greystones, henceforth referred to as Rathmine and Supermare. These different interminglings and segregations, characteristic especially of seaside resort sites, namely exemplified in the Tremor races image used here, make fascinating case studies of class relations, but also, I guess, act as markers, especially in the late 19th century, of a form of socially focused end spatialization and sort of intermingling. As a third theme, then, the logical extension, I suppose, of the relational geographies associated with the spaces and their interpretations and practices leads to a concern with the positionality of health and healing in these sites. All sites are marked, essentially markers of a set of contested relations between what you might call hydrotherapy versus biomedicine. From an initial set of healing practices which involve drinking and bathing in healing waters, all three become core settings for hydrotherapy and associated practices involving cold and hot water treatments. From a historical health perspective, hydrotherapy, as a representative of what we now call complementary and alternative medicine, or CAM, is acted out in place in relation to the growing power of biomedicine. There are lengthy discussions from established medicine advertising the inherent dangers of the Turkish bath and treatments like cold blanket treatments, very popular in the 1840s and 50s. Here, the excess of heat, steam and cold are extensively debated for their potential harmfulness, as are the dosages of water taken at the spas. Patient biographies and case notes are used to both prove and disprove these dangers. But perhaps what we're really seeing is the core identity of many therapeutic landscapes, the business of health, being fought over and debated. Given the importance of medical therapeutic evidence, what we see here is an interrelated telling and selling of health in place. The reputationally formed discourses make the towns, but also threaten to ruin them. We also see the development of much more mechanical forms of medicalised treatment. Lister and Ronan, and indeed some of the Turkish baths, developed more mechanical forms of treatment, including things such as Schnee and electrovoltaic baths. The interrelationship of electricity and water surprises me. Where the body fits in this, both male and female, is also part of the story, and I'm really only skimming over this. In earlier forms, I guess, the patients to an extent called the shots using broad advice from local practitioners. But in Lister and Varna, in the 19th century, you see the emergence of the spa doctor much more visibly. The French equivalent is the intendant who manages the spas in France. But in Lister, here's the Galron spa building, which is still there, it's still dispensing water. But up here you have Mayville, which is the doctor's house. And suddenly you see, he was actually a descendant of the local landowning family. He becomes the oracle then for treatments and also starts to develop commercially. And I think there's the topographical relationship here is not accidental. The doctor looks down on the practices and manages them, so they can treat a very interesting topographic element as well. And I guess also, maybe linked a little bit to the last presentation, the body is also now much more visibly managed, and the symbols of medicine become much more imprinted, both on it and the place. So, lots of evidence then, but how to make it work in terms of relational and performative terms. Linking my own stubborn empiricism with an interest in deep mapping and how both the theory and the multiple histories in place can be weaved or braided into a convincing narrative remains an aim. And borrowing the idea of braiding from Robin Carron, who uses it to describe the flow of ideas and approaches across and between medical and health geography. And in looking at the three therapeutic landscapes, I think it might be interesting to consider them in two ways. One is to think about intersection and embeddedness, tied into this notion of braiding. What are the times, events, actions where different strands meet to deepen the map flow or to embed themselves within the streams? The water source, be it natural or manufactured, becomes one such point of intersection. Similarly, the notion of a entrepreneurial cycle might form a structure to embed some sort of demonstrable commonality between the spaces, the inhabitants, and time periods of the therapeutic landscape. As its opposite, the notion of departure or rupture might also be useful in considering, again going back to that braided model, when do strands and streams dry up or become relict. It doesn't always have to be a negative process or indeed sudden, but the application of a notion of rupture might be interesting to apply to the different phases of popularity of, say, hydrotherapy versus conventional medicine, or the points at which the Anglo-Irish begin to swap places with the native Irish within the sites. A classic example being the Napoleonic Wars, which of course were the high point of Irish spas, because the Anglo-Irish weren't able to get to the continent and were forced almost to use their local spas. Likewise, at what point do Turkish baths shift from being sites of healing to sites of social assignations? Again, some very interesting hidden histories there, I think. And the attached image here, which again you won't be able to read the text, but I'll read it for you if I can read it from here, is a postcard, an advertising postcard from St. Anne's Hydro in Blarney. It gives you an idea of the incredible site that was actually there. The postcard reads, and it's from one of the patients or one of the visitors at the site, it says, "Have come down here for a change and hope it will help to bring back my strength." So just a little comment back to somebody. But I think that as an image suggests some sort of an intersection which is simultaneously a site representation, a commercial object, it's advertising the site, a voice from the past, a perceived therapeutic outcome. Last slide. So, in considering the idea of assemblage, I confess I don't understand it fully, but feel it has an innovative applicability to therapeutic landscape research in terms of mobile networks of spaces, identities, practices. The latter in particular may deepen the theoretical idea and will also enable us to consider historical health geography in more in place than non-representational ways, perhaps where movement and habitation, even affect may well play roles. Finally, I think the local global dimension associated with the sites provides us with an interesting sort of orientalism close to home. And perhaps that should read an orientalism closer to Rome, as there is a strong evidence of an emphasis in the classical as much as oriental world that runs through all three sites. The spa, the Turkish bath and the seaside are sites where multiple reputations are created in multiple inhabitations and in turn sustained and underpinned by multiple structurations. These multiple social and cultural practices that produce, sustain and modify space are evident here, I hope, in an account of therapeutic places within Ireland that are in Veronica Strang's words both typical and unique.